Your Excellencies, good morning. My name is Gaston Perez-Itagle, first speaker for applicant. Together with my co-agent, Mr. Gerald Respicio, we respectfully enter our appearance before the court. With the court's indulgence, we respectfully reserve 10 minutes for my submissions, an additional 10 minutes for my co-agent submissions, as well as 5 minutes for our rebuttal. Thank you, Your Excellencies, and may it please the court.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, a pleasant morning. My name is Kathleen Bernardon, first agent, the respondent, together with my co-agent, Carmina Guevara, respectfully enter our appearance on behalf of the respondent. With the indulgence of this court, we respectfully reserve 10 minutes for my submission, 10 minutes for my co-agent, and 5 minutes for rebuttal, if necessary. Thank you, Your Excellencies, and may it please the court.
First counsel.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, again, good morning. My name again is Gaston Perez-Itagle, first speaker for applicant. Your Excellencies, at this point, it is important to state our stance with respect to the matter at hand. We are against a total ban on reasonable corporal punishment. But what is reasonable corporal punishment, Your Excellencies? To get the answer for this, we must look to several sources, through studies and through jurisprudence. Your Excellencies, Murray Strauss defines corporal punishment as the infliction of pain with the purpose of teaching the child and to form his moral conscience in order to make him a functioning member of society. From jurisprudence we can glean several factors with which to determine whether or not corporal punishment is reasonable or not. In the case of U.S. versus Arnold, several factors were set forth by the court in order to determine whether or not corporal punishment in that case was reasonable or not. Factors such as the age of the child, the size of the child, the mental and physical well-being or capabilities of the child, as well as the graveness of the error.
Why are you using U.S. jurisprudence when there are studies that clearly establish that cultural differences and societal differences clearly call for different deployments of discipline, maybe from the U.S. compared to the Philippines to Latin America?
Yes, Your Excellencies. First and foremost, U.S. jurisprudence holds persuasive value in the Philippines. Secondly, Your Excellencies, studies have shown that since the Philippines is heavily influenced by American culture, studies from and jurisprudence from American culture will indeed prove valuable when applied to the matter at hand. This is also corroborated by a study published in the UP Journal of Law. Your Excellencies, furthermore, we wish to delimit or to limit the application of reasonable corporal punishment. We would wish to separate reasonable corporal punishment from child abuse. But what is child abuse, Your Excellencies? Child abuse, as defined by Black's legal dictionary, is the infliction of cruelty upon the person of a child, whether mental, physical, or psychological. What is cruelty, Your Excellencies? Black's legal dictionary goes on further to define cruelty as the malicious infliction of harm upon any living creature. Your Excellencies, we do not condone child abuse. We would just like to be very firm in this matter. We are only for reasonable corporal punishment. Your Excellencies, the meat of my argument will consist of two submissions. First, on the studies in corporal punishment, and second, on international law in the context of corporal punishment.
Before that, you keep on saying that you're for reasonable corporal punishment, but it's established by fact and by experience that most corporal punishment happens in the heat of passion, in the heat of anger, or at the heat of emotion by the parents. So how exactly do you draw the line, and how do you regulate the actions by the parents pertaining to discipline of the child?
Yes, sir. Many studies, Your Excellencies, have shown that when administered for the purposes of discipline, corporal punishment does not negatively affect the child. This is corroborated by such scholars such as Cope, from Duke University and has been duly published, as well as by Hicks and Chenoweth from the University of Texas.
That's not answering the question because you're looking at the effect on the child.
Yes, sir.
I was asking how do you exactly regulate the actions of the parents when they usually inflict corporal punishment in the heat of passion?
Meaning that it will become abuse because of this.
Definitely. How can you claim that you can regulate it as to be reasonable?
Okay, Your Excellency. When it's aside from, when it becomes child abuse, we do not condone that anymore. Studies have shown, Your Excellencies, that the infliction or the administration of corporal punishment does not necessarily lead to child abuse. Therefore, implying that child abuse is a direct consequence of corporal punishment, or that it is in any way a reason combined or...
Speaker,
Yes.
when does corporal punishment become child abuse? Who determines that?
Your Excellencies, we submit that it happens to be on a case-to-case basis. Several cases have shown that there are factors that can be considered. However, given that the situation differs from case to case because of the age of the child, the capabilities of the child, as well as the errors of the child, we submit that it must be determined on a case-to-case
So
basis.
it's very difficult to distinguish between corporal punishment and child abuse?
Your Excellencies, I wouldn't say that it's very difficult. However, Your Excellencies, I would say that it differs from case to case. For example, in the commentary of a leading scholar in family law, a member of this renowned institution, the Ateneo Law School, a case was cited, Bloor versus Z, in which a toy phone was inserted into the mouth of his son. Your Excellencies, we never condone that. We would never admit that this would be reasonable corporal punishment, as it was clearly beyond the necessary needs, and it was clearly beyond what is necessary given the situation. Your Excellencies, that would be an example of determining whether or not such is reasonable or not. If there are no preliminary observations, or more observations, Your Excellencies, I will proceed with my first submission on the studies of corporal punishment. Thank you, Your Excellencies. There are many studies that assail corporal punishment on the grounds that such is a leading factor in the negative development of children. However, Your Excellencies, most of these studies, if not all, have as their object correlation and not causation. Well entrenched, Your Excellencies, is the doctrine that correlation does not equal causation. There are many factors or many sources that cite this. As my source, I would cite John Aldrich from the University of Duke, who studied scientific method correlation and its effects. Your Excellencies, correlation does not equal causation. As such, our argument is we cannot base legislation on inconclusive evidence based merely on correlation. To this, Your Excellencies, to further expound on the matter, correlation in terms of corporal punishment, the reason why we say there is correlation is that there are many other factors that play into the negative development of the child. For example, Bomrand, Larzalier, and Cowan would cite that situational factors such as the age of the child, the social standing of the family, the severity of the punishment, and the frequency.
So what you're presenting before the court is a negative argument. Just because we can't draw a correlation, then let's err on the side of allowing corporal punishment. But isn't it in the family code that it's always the best interest of the child that has to come first? So if it's the best interest of the child, and it's hard to draw the line, as my co-justice has established, then why not err on the side of protecting the child and ban all kinds of physical contact?
Your Excellency, as I have stated a while ago, in the early part of my speech, there is no studies that conclusively confirm that corporal punishment would lead to child abuse. Additionally, Your Excellencies, corporal punishment would, in certain studies, if we are assuming without conceding that correlational studies may be admitted, it has also been found that corporal punishment has immediate effects, and when administered to children of 7 and below, depending on the cognitive development, of course, of the child, such is more effective and has longer lasting positive effects than alternative forms of corporal punishment. Furthermore, Your Excellencies, the American Psychology Association found that if the culture views corporal punishment as a necessary consequence of bad behavior, such reasonable use does not damage the child. Understanding that the Philippines does view corporal punishment as a necessary consequence of misbehavior, we can assume that this study, or we can even infer that this study, is applicable to the case of Barn.
Okay, not even on hampering the development of the child, but maybe even from the viewpoint